I was in touch with 8 or 9 human trafficking gangs who thought I was a Vietnamese migrant, and that I wanted to come across the English Channel into Britain. And I'd reported all of them to the police, and the police hadn't done anything about it. They were all operating on social media. On TikTok, they had videos of them bringing people over, their WhatsApp phone numbers. It would be the equivalent of a drug dealer setting up a social media profile saying, hello, I'm a drug dealer, here's my phone number, and here's the location of where I am, and the police not doing anything about it. So I went back over, posing as an illegal migrant, and met up with 3 different human traffickers in the space of 3 or 4 hours, just to show how easy that was to do, and how easily, if our government wanted to, or the French government wanted to, you could smash those gangs and disrupt the trade of people. We got all of it on film, but that was pretty hairy because that did involve me interacting with human traffickers. One of them threatened to kill me, and this is in the middle of the migrant camps.
Good evening, everybody. Hello.
Patrick Christys, much to the chagrin of the established guard, is a rapidly rising star in the British media landscape.
On Patrick Christys Tonight, what on earth is Yvette Cooper and the government going to do? They can't keep housing migrants in hotels. It turns out that's been illegal. This is how easy it is, isn't it? You come to the largest migrant camp, you make one phone call, and you can identify a human trafficker. And that's it.
Through a series of hair-raising investigative reports uncovering the dark underbelly of human trafficking and illegal migration into Britain, Christys has rapidly become a household name throughout the UK, and as host of Patrick Christys Tonight, has helped GB News become the most watched news channel in all of Britain, overtaking the BBC just 4 years after launching.
Ever since the first day that GB News existed, we promised you, our loyal viewers and listeners, that we would bring you the true news that nobody else would dare to bring.
The babies give me house, give me anything I can need, give me.
Just give it.
Yeah.
But naturally, taking on issues like mass migration and the hollowing out of British culture has made Christys more than a few detractors.
And what you're looking at now is a migrant boat being winched out of the water. Some quite intrigued locals as well. They must see this all the time, though.
But as Christys sees it, this is Britain's last best chance to save itself, and he isn't going to let her go quietly into that dark night.
It's game over. Get the planes on the runway. Bye-bye. Cheerio. Thanks for the memories. Off you pop.
All right, Patrick, thank you very much for joining us today. I know that our audience here in the United States is going to have a lot to learn from you, so I really appreciate it. The first thing I want to dive right into, I guess it's where a lot of our audience might know you, is the immigration issue. In America, that's no secret to us. Over the last 4 years, we've had something between 12 million and 20 million new illegal immigrants come into the country, depending on how you count it. So we're no stranger to that situation here. But I was just hoping you could kind of start off by letting our audience know, what's the situation like in Britain? Is it worse? Is it better? What's going on over there?
Well, it's absolutely catastrophic here in Britain. We have 2 issues running simultaneously. One is legal immigration. Another one is illegal immigration. I think the most obvious is illegal, mainly because we can see them arriving in small rubber dinghies across the English Channel every single day, clinging to the back of lorries as well. In some cases, by the way, just taking an aeroplane, landing at Heathrow or Gatwick Airport, our 2 main airports in this country, and then claiming asylum on arrival. Several reasons why it's been utterly catastrophic. Firstly, the numbers, they are up about 50% year on year, despite the fact that we have a Prime Minister saying that he's going to, quote, smash the gangs. The other aspect to it is obviously safety and national security. We've had Islamic State sleeper cells targeting the English Channel coming over here, the Iranian terrorists as well. We've also had murderers, paedophiles, rapists, you name it. We've had it coming into Britain illegally and then being put up at the expense of the British taxpayer. Another big aspect is where we're putting them. So we are now putting them in hotels. So these are just normal hotels that were used for either tourists or Brits or business people around the country. Some of them were used by locals as well, because they'd have like hotel spas or gyms that would be servicing the local community. So many of them, hundreds of them, have now been gobbled up by the British state and are being used to house illegal immigrants. We don't know where a lot of these people come from or what their backgrounds are. And we have had huge numbers now of cases where there has been child rape, where there has been murders, where there's been physical assaults committed by people in these hotels against people in the local community who didn't ask for them to be there and who didn't want them to be there. And that has now culminated in protests, massive protests. Finally, I think the British lion is starting to roar, and doing so in a mostly peaceful way, it must be said, which has been quite heartwarming. The general situation here is that we've had enough, and it's the cost as well. The British taxpayer is spending billions and billions and billions of pounds a year on these hotels, but we're simultaneously being told that we are flat broke as a country and all of our taxes have to go up, and we can't afford to fill that hole in the road outside your house, or we can't build enough schools for children that are already here, that British children. We can't do that because we haven't got enough money, but we've got all the money in the world for what is, and let's be honest with you, almost entirely men from third world countries who have traveled through several other safe countries in order to get here.
Yeah, and I guess when you hear about immigration problems, that's not necessarily something new to the West or even exclusive to Britain. I was in Germany a few months ago, and, they're having major problems there with Syrian immigration and other places in the Middle East. But why right now does it seem like, especially in the UK, that this is reaching such a fever pitch? What is it about the conditions on the ground now that it might be different from 2, 3, even 5 years ago?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, eventually there's a straw that breaks the camel's back. And there's been several straws now, and there's several camels that are currently lying dead on the floor. The thing I will say about, you raised Germany there, and a lot of people talk about it being a European-wide illegal migration problem. The problem for Great Britain is that because of our geography, once you have tried and failed to get into every single other European country, we are the end of the line, and there's nowhere else that you can really go. We can't just send them up to Norway, somewhere there. So if you can get to Britain now, you can stay. This is the other thing that's really starting to grate at the British public. Even Germany now has agreed that they will start sending people, deporting them back to Afghanistan. Whereas here in Britain, we have next to no deportations for illegal Channel migrants. In fact, the government has said that they've deported 32,000 people since they've come to office. The reality has emerged that we've paid most of those people to leave. We've paid them to go back home, or they've deported voluntarily. So we have had numerous different cases here. For example, there was an Afghan man who came over and who tried and failed 3 times to claim asylum. He even committed a sexual assault whilst he was here. Then he lied and said that he'd converted to Christianity and therefore he would be persecuted if we deported him back to a Middle Eastern country. He then doused a woman and a small child in acid on the streets of London, about 1.5 miles away from where I am now, and he'd been allowed to stay in Britain. We've even had cases of a Nigerian woman, for example, who had tried and failed 8 times to get into Britain. What she then did was join a banned terrorist organisation, but one that is only banned in Nigeria. So if we deported her back to Nigeria, she would be persecuted as a quote-unquote terrorist. So that meant that we had to keep her here. These cases are happening every single day. Our legal and judicial system is more or less refusing to deport people. We won't even do things like mandatory age verifications. So you have these ridiculous court cases happening where a 6'5", bearded, grey-haired with a receding hairline Sudanese man is claiming to be a 16-year-old boy. And some of our judges, who, by the way, I think are in on this immigration racket, politically speaking, some of our judges are willing to let this lot stay. So what's happening in Britain right now, to come full circle to your question, is that the public feels utterly helpless. We have a political leader who has lied to us about wanting to sort this problem out. We've had 20 years of consistently voting for political parties who told us they would sort this out and they haven't. And we have a judicial system that seems to refuse to deport anyone, even violent criminals. And that means that they have to then live amongst us. And we have the icing on top of the cake, which is that we pay for them. We give them a house. We give them education for their children. We'll give them brand new phones. In some cases, we even give them free driving lessons. It's absolute insanity.
Well, I think a surprising thing, especially coming from the United States, where everything's looked at in terms of kind of a Republican, Democrat, left-wing, right-wing dynamic, is, okay, the Democrats are going to be soft on immigration, and then when the Republicans get in, at least ostensibly, they're going to be stricter. So right now, you would understand with Labor and Keir Starmer in charge, people would expect this kind of stuff to happen. But from what I've seen you talk about, and other conservative media figures in Britain, is that the Conservative Party is just as culpable for this as the Labour Party. Is there any truth to that, or what's going on there?
It's a straightforward statement of fact. The Conservative Party in Britain didn't bother to conserve anything. So they are responsible for record levels of legal immigration, which has resulted in massive demographic change, which I think we'll probably get on to.
Yeah.
But in terms of the illegal stuff, they are also entirely responsible. If they'd have just turned the first boat full of illegal migrants back and sent it towards France, there might have been a little bit of outrage at the start, but the problem would have stopped. Instead, they let them in, they let the situation get bigger and bigger. They didn't decide to leave something called the European Convention on Human Rights, which is this kind of globalist body that means that we can't really deport anyone. Even if a British judge here decides to deport someone, they can take that over abroad, so a judge from somewhere like Luxembourg or San Marino can make the decision on our behalf that someone has to stay in Britain. They didn't leave any of those conventions, so they didn't give us total control of our own borders, so that's been allowed to happen. They are the ones that started the migrant hotels. They are the ones that, on their watch, the Refugees Welcome Brigade was allowed to take root like Japanese knotweed within our society. They also stifled a lot of people from talking out about this. Initially it was like, oh gosh, you can't possibly say that any of these people coming across the English Channel could be criminals. That would make you a racist. Well, all of this happened under their watch. And now we're in a situation where it is existential to Britain. So, okay, the Conservatives aren't in power now. Labour are. They've been useless. But the Conservatives were in power for 14 years that led up to this. And really, you have to say that everything until a year and a half ago was entirely their fault.
There's one thing that I keep going back to, and that's 2016, right? When Trump gets elected first and Brexit happens, There's this idea that the British people, and by de facto the British government, are kind of rebelling against Europe and getting away from things like what you just mentioned, the European Human Rights Commission sort of thing. So how is it that Britain goes from Brexit, leaving the EU, to, in a lot of ways, becoming the most European of all the countries, in a sense? I don't quite understand what happened.
Well, because the British public voted for something that they weren't supposed to vote for. And this is the downfall of democracy if you happen to be a powerful elite in society. We were supposed to vote to remain in the European Union. And we didn't. And that meant that our political elites, who, by the way, overwhelmingly voted to stay in the European Union, were then put in charge of deciding the terms of our exit. They made a complete catastrophe of the situation. We even had a prime minister called Theresa May, who voted Remain. We put her in charge of the actual deal. So it's ridiculous. I mean, you start putting a bank robber in charge of security. Why would you do anything like that? So we had all of these kind of gormless pro-EU Europhiles globalists that were in charge of dictating Britain's future going forward. So we made a complete mess of it. So we didn't really properly leave. We should have just gone absolutely out. You mentioned that time there. President Trump in the White House for the first time. Britain votes to leave the European Union. What a moment that could have been for our two countries. What a fantastic point in Western history that could have been for us, and we messed it up. And it's been a huge problem for us. We've been far too ashamed of the idea that Britain could stand on its own 2 feet. And there's something quite ironic here, really, which is that we're simultaneously being told to be ashamed of Britain's past, which is one of, more or less kind of world domination in a way, spreading out across the world and doing some quite powerful things there with the empire. We're told to be ashamed of that. And then we're also simultaneously told that Britain is so weak that we couldn't possibly stand on our own 2 feet. Well, which one is it, guys? Which one is it? It's ridiculous. So, we made a mess of it. We didn't take back full independence. We're still trying to take back full independence. And these problems occur as a result of that.
So back to a little bit of the specifics of this problem right now. When you look at American immigration, it's very easy to understand, right? There's the Mexican border. A lot of people cross it. People think of the UK, especially Americans, a lot of the time. They say, okay, this is an island. It's probably a lot harder to get to, a lot harder to access. So if you could just break it down a little bit, because I think a lot of people in our audience might be familiar with the interview you did with the Sudanese gentleman when he was expecting Britain to give him pretty much free everything. And it was really shocking shocking to see that from our end. So how does somebody from Sudan end up becoming a refugee in Britain? Can you just walk us through that process real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if you start out in Sudan or Libya, etc., what you can do quite easily is once you get to a part of Africa where you can take a boat to mainland Europe, you just do that. And then you set foot normally in a country like, say, Greece, some of the Italian islands, or maybe even a Spanish island there. So that's how you start. Then you've kissed European Union soil. And then what those countries will all too often do is they will decide they don't want these people because they are not all doctors and engineers. So
don't say.
They will, yeah. So what they're quite happy to do is just pass them on through their country and pass them on. So through a combination of taking public transport or just hiding in the back of articulated lorries and vehicles, they will then work their way through to Northern Europe. And they'll normally get to a country like Germany, where they will make an initial kind of asylum claim. Now, Germany might reject them, so they'll just move on. Obviously, there's quite a good chance that at some point they will have committed various different crimes going through these countries, or as part of a European Union quota system, which there is for countries that are still members of the European Union, what they might do is be processed in a country and then told you're going to Sweden or you're going to somewhere else. And they might decide, I don't like Sweden, it's a bit too cold. So what they'll do is they'll just keep doing what I was talking to you about before, getting to Northern Europe. And then ultimately, loads of them will get to France. And then once you're in France, you can get to the northern point of France, and the French government will do pretty much nothing to stop you. And then you have two routes into Great Britain, really two routes into Great Britain. You can either come in on the back of a lorry, because we have a tunnel that's been built from France under the English Channel, under the sea there to Great Britain, or you can take a boat just in one of these small boats that we see happening all the time. So that's the route, and those are the main two routes in order to do it. Once you get to northern France, that's how they're doing it.
So are the French just happy to push them on? Is that why the French government is not doing anything to stop this? You would think that to foster good relations with the United Kingdom government, you would want to, not flood them with a ton of refugees. So what are the French doing here?
Yeah, well, the French, and I would argue a lot of our European cousins have forgotten the things that Great Britain and indeed America did for them several years ago. They don't like to talk about the war, do they? But let's be honest with you, Europe would look incredibly different if it wasn't for our two great nations working together in order to fight back against that. However, that doesn't seem to matter anymore. Because we left the European Union, a lot of European Union countries decided they wanted to teach us a lesson. So you get countries like France who've decided to do absolutely nothing in order to stop these boats. The British taxpayer has sent them £500 million. Now, I understand that for your American audience, that might not sound like a lot of money. But for us here, relative to our economy in Britain, that is a huge amount of money. £500 million British pounds sent over to the French to do things to secure the border at their end. They were supposed to be stopping these boats in the water. They were supposed to be helping to smash some of the criminal gangs that are doing it, helping to move and destroy the migrant camps that are there, which allow them to operate as a base before they cross the English Channel. Also do basic things like put a fence up between, the beach and the sea. The French have done absolutely nothing. In fact, we even paid for night vision cameras to be used to operate along the beaches, because illegal migrants hide in the sand dunes and then they'll get their boat and then they'll make the crossing in the early hours of the morning. We then looked into what they were doing with these cameras, and the French hadn't even bothered to turn them on. So they don't even care about this. There's also a rule in France, which they say they've changed, but they haven't, because we can see it still going on. It's not as simple as it being a line of coast and then the sea. There's also inlets, so little rivers and canals, etc., that come in. If migrants get on boats 2 miles inland on a canal system, they are then technically in water, which means that the French police have no obligation to stop them. So you see these farcical images of a boat full of Sudanese and Eritrean men just sailing through a French village like this, with almost like the French police waving them off before they get out into the English Channel. And then something really disgusting happens. The French border force pick their boat up in the water and tow them into British waters, where British border force boats will then collect them and bring them to Britain. And that is, for me, the most galling aspect of all of this. That for the last however many years, the French have been towing illegal migrants deliberately into British waters so that we then have to come and pick them up and bring them to Britain.
Sounds like a fantastic ally to me, but so So we know the British people aren't the ones benefiting, and we know that we can blame the French, we can blame the Conservatives, the Tories, we can blame Labour, we can blame whoever. But I guess my question is, who is benefiting in Britain from this? Who stands to gain something? Because you wouldn't just continue to allow this to happen, especially people in power, if somebody wasn't getting something in return, right?
Yeah. So I would suggest that ultimately it's going to be left-wing parties in Britain who benefit from this because they are importing future voters. And we are seeing that both with legal and illegal immigration. It's very, very unlikely that these hundreds of thousands of people who enter Britain illegally are ever going to vote for a political party that wants to stop that. So I think they're helping to secure that. I also think there's an ideological thing going on here. We have, I imagine you do in America as well, but what we have here, a huge cohort of people who don't believe in borders, who don't really believe in national identity or dare I say it, kind of racial, cultural identity. They don't believe in any of that stuff. And so by just trying to import a load of people from the third world into the country with a smorgasbord of different ethnicities and religions, etc., what that can help to do is create this kind of one world country that they are so desperate to create, to ultimately destroy the idea of national identity, destroy the idea of patriotism, and then I would argue the natural conclusion to that would be to hand more power or make it easier for some of the globalist elites to be in power. And just to give you a little bit of quite funny anecdotal evidence on this at the moment, we've currently got a thing going on in Britain, because like patriotic people have had enough finally now, called Raise the Colours. Well, we've got the national flag, being hoisted from lampposts and buildings and all of that. And what local councils have started doing is taking the flag of this country down, because they say we can't have that, it might be culturally sensitive, or it might pose a danger to motorists. However, if you put the Palestinian flag up, or the flag of Lebanon or Yemen, or in many cases, like in Birmingham, for example, which is our second biggest city, the flag of Pakistan, because they have a huge Pakistani population there, that's allowed. The flag that is not allowed is the flag of this country. And so, again, just to come back to your point, kind of what does that say, really? Importing a lot of people from different countries and destroying national identity and national unity would play into the hands of those people, wouldn't it? The people that don't really want Britain to seem British anymore.
Yeah, it is ideological at that point. And before we kind of move on to how this is really transforming Britain, I want to ask you one more question about this immigration thing, because I have to admit, when I was watching your video, I believe it was in Calais, and you were at the Sudanese, it looked like an old factory with a tent city built inside a factory. My palms were sweaty watching that, because was that not nerve-wracking? And we'll run the clip so our audience can see, but was that not nerve-wracking to step into those confines?
Well, it has to be done because no one else is doing it. People over here are being told about the migrant crisis every day, and we're living it, and we're seeing the migrant crisis being moved into people's communities and rural communities in the shape of these hotels that we're talking about, and we're being told that the problem is being solved, which is a lie. So I decided I had to go over there and show people. Now, okay, all right, at times it was a little bit risky, but I mean, you might know this, I don't know, but there's a little switch that goes off in your brain when you feel like A, you're doing something quite important, but also B, your camera's rolling, you're on there, you're on a bit of a mission, and I kind of disassociated from what was going around me. I've been twice now. The clip that you're referring to was an absolute gift, and we spoke to lots of people like that, man. Why are you coming to Britain? House, money, car, everything, you name it, we'll give it to them. But then I went back a second time, and this one, must admit, was the time that I was a bit nervous, because we were being told in this country that our government is doing everything to smash the human trafficking gangs. And we knew that wasn't true. How did I know that? Because I was in touch with 8 or 9 human trafficking gangs who thought I was a Vietnamese migrant, and that I wanted to come across the English Channel into Britain. And I'd reported all of them to the police, and the police hadn't done anything about it. They were all operating on social media. On TikTok, they had videos of them bringing people over, their WhatsApp phone numbers. It would be the equivalent of a drug dealer setting up a social media profile saying, hello, I'm a drug dealer, here's my phone number, and here's the location of where I am, and the police not doing anything about it. So I went back over, posing as an illegal migrant, and met up with 3 different human traffickers in the space of 3 or 4 hours, just to show how easy that was to do, and how easily, if our government wanted to, or the French government wanted to, you could smash those gangs and disrupt the trade of people. We got all of it on film, but that was pretty hairy because that did involve me interacting with human traffickers. One of them threatened to kill me, and this is in the middle of the migrant camps. The other thing, sorry, just quickly on this, when I went back to that warehouse, the same one where the first time I'd been, where we had the give me guy, I went back there, and that was hostile. Right, and they were throwing things at me. They wanted me out of there. No one was talking again. Like, the word has gone round amongst all of these illegal migrants to not talk to anyone who's in the media, not talk to any press at all, and be very hostile to them, and be very aggressive towards them. And so, there were some scary times there. I mean, we had bottles thrown at us. They were attacking the car that we were in. We had to get out. Like I said, I've been threatened with just being killed, and all of this. But what I think is really important there is for the British public to see this. Because these are the people who are about to come and maybe move in next door to you. And you can make your own minds up about whether or not you think we would like all of these people here in Britain. What are they going to contribute to the country? And what kind of safety risk do they pose? Because that's a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of bleeding heart liberals to acknowledge, which is that if you import a load of people from war-torn countries with often a very medieval and backward ideology as well, there is a propensity to violence there that does not necessarily exist at a low level amongst the British public. There's attitudes towards women and girls that are not common over here as well, and there are huge safety issues. And the only way that you can make people understand that is by being willing to go and take risks, take personal risks, and go over there and actually show it. And it was very easy to expose. You just have to want to.
Well, I'm glad you are exposing it, because Britain is changing from what I can tell. I've only, recently flown through Heathrow, but even at Heathrow, I don't think I dealt with a single employee at the airport that would have been of what you consider a native Britainer. And that's not to be prejudiced. That's not to be racist. That's just the facts on the ground. There's no one that you would look at there and think, oh, this person is emblematic of British culture, because there's hijabs, there's people barely speaking English, so on and so forth. Which kind of brings me to the next point. I think it was a couple months ago, J.D. Vance is giving a speech, and he makes a joke in jest where he says,
I was talking about, what is the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon? And we were like, maybe it's Iran, maybe Pakistan already kind of counts. And then we sort of finally decided maybe it's actually the UK.
That Britain might essentially become the first Islamic country to possess a nuclear weapon. And people jumped down his throat at that. Obviously, he was kidding a little bit, but from what I'm seeing, the trends on the ground in a few decades, that might not be a hyperbolic statement at all.
Well, yeah, quite. I mean, look, the latest, let's just deal in facts, right? So the latest census that we had in this country was in 2021. And what it revealed, that in England and Wales, Christians are now a minority. So people who identify as Christian are now a minority. It's 46.2%. The second largest amount of people were atheists. But then Muslims were the third largest, and that was at just 6.5%. Now, that was 2021. The latest predictions for demographic change in Britain will put the Muslim population at just under 18% of the British population by 2050. So that's quite stark, and that would indicate huge demographic and religious, and with it, cultural changes in Britain. You mentioned the Heathrow Airport situation. I mean, that's just true. And people in Britain joke about that all the time. Another complete farce is that, these hotels full of illegal migrants that I've been telling you about, we employ legal migrants to work as security in those hotels. So we're importing illegal migrants, and then we get people to come over from countries like Pakistan and India to act as security. So we've got legal migrants being security guards at hotels full of illegal migrants in this country. It's insane.
Make sense to me. That's like the worst Ponzi scheme I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I know. And again, the only reason we now know about this is because people have started saying, well, I've had enough about this migrant hotel. I'm going to go and have a little look at it. And they've not broken into it or something like that, but they've taken it close, like citizen journalists, more or less, with cameras. And they try to engage with the security staff, and they realize they can't speak English. Some of them can't even speak English, which is insane. But to come back to your point about the potential issues with Islam, I suppose, in Britain, or the levels of Islam in Britain, there's a few different aspects to this. So We are undergoing a law change, which is a new Islamophobia definition. Okay, so what that could mean is that it would, me having this conversation with you right now could be legally Islamophobic, which is nuts, right? So there's that. It could stifle conversations on things like the grooming gangs issue. They have really been just called the Pakistani rape gangs issue, because the overwhelming perpetrators have been either from Pakistan or of Pakistani heritage here in Britain. That could be stopped by this Islamophobia definition. Extremism and terrorism, talking about terrorist attacks or the potential for extremism and terrorism, that could be stopped. Also, what we've had is very concerning situations. So, for example, there was a school teacher in Britain at a school called Batley Grammar School who decided, he was a religious studies teacher, he showed some children a picture of that Charlie Hebdo cartoon front page, the one that depicted the Prophet Muhammad. This was in Britain, in Yorkshire, in Britain. He is currently, and his entire family are in hiding and in police protection, and will be for life, because there were calls for him to die as a result of that. A woman who's, I think, 13 or 14-year-old son who has autism was in a local school. He accidentally knocked over a copy of the Quran, which must have been in one of the classrooms, some religious classroom, and it scuffed the Quran. She had to go to the local mosque, flanked by British police officers, to apologise to the local Muslim community as a result of that. Britain has the highest proportion of Sharia courts of any Western country. We have at least 85 Sharia courts in Britain. That's more than, we're the Western capital for Sharia courts. We're also seeing other issues rear its head, which have been entirely imported from the African or Muslim world. Things like honour killings and female genital mutilation. I get that these are very depressing topics to talk about, but I think it's important. We have now clinics here, dedicated clinics, National Health Service clinics in this country, dedicated to dealing with issues of FGM and with honour killings. These are not domestic British issues. So if you look at all of that, we also allowed a huge proportion of Islamic State fighters to come back to Britain. And it's only recently that we've prescribed a new terrorist organisation called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which were already prescribed on the continent, despite the fact that our current Prime Minister acted as their lawyer to try to prevent them from being banned as a terrorist organisation in Germany. Anyway, shortly after the October the 7th massacre in Israel with Hamas, they took to the streets of Britain and called for global jihad with big orange banners on the streets of London. And finally, that led to them being prescribed. There have been leaders of Hamas organisations that live in council houses in Britain. We've given them council houses in Britain. So that thing that JD Vance said there, I get was in jest. I get it was tongue in cheek. But you add all of those different things together about where Britain is now, both culturally and societally, and then you look at that direction of travel there, like I said to you, predicted by 2050 to be somewhere in the region of 18% Muslim as a population. I think those problems are only going to get worse, not better, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and we know this, again, another thing that's kind of said in jest sometimes, but is really a serious issue, I think, if you think about it, is the Muhammad thing, right? That each year, for the past however many years, the most popular boy's name in Britain has been Muhammad. But once I started looking into the list, I noticed it wasn't just Muhammad. I think it was, I have some other names here too. It was Ibrahim, Ali, Yusuf, and Muhammad spelled a different way are all in the top 50 of British boys' names. That doesn't strike me as George or Harry. I'm sorry. So fine, on its face, that could be a little bit of an issue, but add that with all the things that you've just said, and it seems to me like the politicians, even the ones that might think they're importing a voting bloc, would have to wake up and smell the roses. But just to let you in on a little bit of what we've experienced, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Andy Burnham. I think he's the mayor of Manchester.
Yeah.
So I had some personal contact with him at South by Southwest this past year and pushed him on the things like the grooming gangs and why he was so proud to see Manchester become a multicultural society. You mentioned the numbers in Britain, but I have numbers here for Manchester that blew my mind. In 2011, it was 49% Christian. Now it's 36%. And it was 15.8% Muslim, and now it's 22%. So almost parity, Islamic to Christian society. Britain, forgive me, from my perspective, was an inherently Christian society. And if you import something so frequently, then when does Britain stop becoming Britain? When is it in something else entirely?
Well, if we take our lead from our dear king, which is probably the most British man that there could possibly be, our king, he's shifted from being the defender of the faith, which is the Christian faith, the Protestant faith, the Church of England faith, of which he is the head of, to being defender of faith. So faith in its entirety. So some people would see that as being just a nice little fluffy thing. Okay, fine. Another way of looking at that is that the ball is rolling down the hill so fast when it comes to multiculturalism and diversity and different religions in Britain and the retreat and decline of Christian culture, that in order to basically feel as though metaphorically he has to keep his head, he has decided that he wants to retreat from being defender of the faith and being just defender of faith. It's symptomatic, it's symbolic, a little bit like those name changes that you mentioned, all of these little kind of anecdotal things like seeing road signs in Urdu, for example, or when you go into the hospital now, you'll have an English word and then it'll be various different Arabic or Urdu or even Pashtun languages or Farsi, all of that. So that just shows you the kind of the rate of where it's at. And again, people don't like to believe what they can see and hear with their own eyes. Recently we celebrated Pakistan Independence Day in Britain. That was I think it was last Thursday. And for Pakistan Independence Day, Birmingham Council, our second city, painted their entire public library in the colours of the Pakistan flag. They even hoisted the Pakistan flag. The Lord Mayor hoisted the Pakistan flag above Birmingham. And there were street parties, total street parties, lawless street parties, by the way, in Manchester, which you mentioned, in Birmingham and in London. The police didn't want to step in and stop that. They didn't want to do anything about that. So that, again, to me, at face value, might be a sign of all celebrating your historic culture. Another way of looking at it would have been to be a show of force, really, and an attempt to show, look, we are here, we're here in serious numbers, and we're not here to mess about. It's been happening for ages. For a long time, people were forced into silence because there were the worst thing you could be called in Britain was racist or an Islamophobe or far right. But now I think that tide is turning. But the question is going to be, is it too little, too late? Really, I mean, what practically speaking, I think the time to have, if you cared about trying to keep Britain, largely speaking, as a kind of a Western Christian society, the time to have dealt with that and put your foot down was probably 10 or 15 years ago. And it's very difficult now to see how that changes. I mean, another good example for you on this is you've mentioned our cities. The demographic change in our cities is huge. But there is currently planning permission that's been accepted for a £2.5 million mega mosque in Cumbria, which is one of the most rural parts of Britain. There is not a Muslim population in Cumbria. There might be like a couple of hundred or something like that. And, it's insane. So they are building a £2.5 million mega mosque there to service basically no one at the moment. But what it will do, obviously, is act as a beacon, right? And then you are in a situation where, the picture postcard, typical quintessential British countryside suddenly becomes, a place with a very, very large Muslim population, which, okay, all right, people might say it was racist to have a problem with that. Well, it's a kind of about culture, isn't it, really? And we have tourists from all around the world who come to places like the Lake District because it's like one of the most British places you could possibly come. Very tweed, all these stone cottages, all of that stuff. And if the culture of that area fundamentally changes, then you've kind of lost your country, haven't you, really?
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to touch on a little bit more, because there was a video coming out of Dearborn, Michigan, just a couple days ago, where they had a big rally, and there was a man that said essentially that the Muslims in the West, it was their job to stand up to the American empire and help it fall. The American empire that's been hurting our people since the beginning, the imperial Western powers that have been hurting our people since the beginning, they must fall. And inshallah, they will fall. Usher in the fall of the American empire. That seems pretty self-explanatory to me, what some people want to do. So we know that there's politicians that want to import this for their own reasons, probably business owners that profit off cheap labor. But you generally wouldn't fault asylum seekers or people that have suffered hardships abroad for wanting a better life. But it seems to me, and maybe you can answer this better, that a lot of these people coming to Britain, coming to the United States, other Western countries, might potentially have other motives other than just seeking a better life?
Yeah, yes. I mean, so we know that on a few fronts. I've already mentioned to you that we have absolute proof that Islamic State sleeper cells have been coming across, that the Iranian government has been bringing people across as well. We've just in the last few days arrested an asylum seeker who turned out to be a Houthi rebel. So these are just the people that we know about. And so just purely in terms of that sense and the pure terrorist side of the Islamist issue there, well, we know it's happening and it's impossible to police. So that is there. And again, it's a question, isn't it? It's almost like an unanswerable question as to whether or not all of these people are just singularly coming here for a better life, or whether or not they would quite feel as though there is some kind of religious duty to try to spread out around Europe and around the world. The thing that I would say about that, which would indicate maybe that some people do have that view, is that there's not really been a huge attempt at assimilation or integration. And these aren't just by asylum seekers or whatever, just by people who've come here legally, really. I mean, there are huge pockets of this country now where you would have no idea where in the world, well, certainly nowhere in the Western world, you were if you walk down there. Very little desire to quite often have English as a first language sometimes. And we are now seeing, the stats on this are quite stark, that some of the most fundamentalist and extremist Islamist people in this country are the youngest generation. So people who were born here now. The Henry Jackson Society did a bit of research into this in the wake of the October the 7th disaster and found that some of the most sympathetic support for Hamas and other terrorist groups was amongst the 18 to 24-year-old demographic, which would strongly indicate that they were born here. So, there are very, very, very concerning things. But of course, in Britain today, I can hear what people in Britain watching this will say. I mean, by the way, if they're watching this, they probably agree with it. But people watching Britain, in Britain will say, which is that, like, gosh, you can't have these kind of conversations. It all seems a little bit racist. I mean, well, okay, well, should we just not believe what we can see with our own eyes then? And we are now getting stats to back this up. We're getting statistics to back this up. People used to say, well, you didn't really mind about the Ukrainian refugees coming over. I say, well, they weren't coming over anything like the same numbers, and they were all women and children, and we could see the war. So, and they want to go home when it's over. So there's some key differences there, aren't there? From like 1,000 Sudanese, Eritrean, Iraqi, and Afghan men coming into your country in a single day, which has happened on small boats, with no intention of going home, with every intention of bringing their family over here. The latest stats that we have about crimes relating to these people, by the way, is that 1 in every 100 of them is wanted for or has committed a crime here in Britain. There's a case that's erupted. There's an Ethiopian man who came across on a small boat and was in Britain for 4 days and committed 5 sexual assaults, one of them against a girl.
Wait, can you repeat that one time? That went over my head. That's a crazy number.
Yeah, there's an Ethiopian man who came across on a small boat. He was in Britain for a number of days, 4 or 5 days, and committed 4 or 5 sexual assaults, one of them against a young girl. And that was at a hotel called the Bell Hotel in a place called Epping, which is in Essex, which has then been one of the major sites for communities coming out and protesting against that. I mean, another thing that's happened there as well is that whilst there were protesters outside that hotel, locals, mostly women actually, wearing pink shirts saying "protect our kids," there was another arrest from a man inside that hotel. So whilst protests were taking place about the idea that some of these people might be violent sex criminals, there was a man inside who's just been arrested for several counts of assault and 1 count of sexual assault. So even whilst he could see from his window in that hotel, this guy, that there were people outside, locals, protesting, saying, we're worried about the kind of person who's in here. That wasn't enough to stop him allegedly committing sexual assaults and physical assaults as well. It's nuts. It's bonkers. So you've got the one thing about, whether they want to kind of come here and take over and all of that. I don't know necessarily where I entirely stand on that, but sure. Definitely the safety.
Yeah, and I just don't know, and maybe you have a better answer, how long we have to keep pretending. You mentioned the Ukrainian refugees. There was kind of a situation here where we brought over some African or South African refugees, and sort of the progressive left made the argument, oh, what's the difference between X immigrant and Y immigrant? But I don't know how long we have to pretend that the differences in Slavic culture and British culture, or Afrikaner culture and American culture, are not way less dissimilar, or they have way more in common than Middle Eastern Islamic culture and any culture in the West. I mean, by default, Islamic culture preaches things that are antithetical to Western values all the time. So why is it such a big deal, and why is it considered a racist thing to call out something that's so blatantly obvious to anybody with a, lukewarm IQ?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, but it's because people don't want to hear it. It's because it would just shatter their worldview. It would shatter their view that absolutely every single human being is exactly the same. I'm not saying that one group of people is better than anyone else, but what I am saying is you just have to be like blind, deaf and dumb to not appreciate that there are huge differences from people based around geographically where in the world that they were born, the culture, the religion, everything that you've been brought up in. Like, in a way, by definition, that is a very human thing. A lot of us are just products of the environment that we were brought up in. So people are very, very, very unwilling to accept that. The thing that I will say about that is, though, that I think that's having to change. Because now, for the first time in Britain, we are starting to get statistics through that show things like Afghan men are 20 times more likely to commit a sexual assault in Britain than Brits. You also just get the general crime levels. I mean, in London, for example, I think it's something like 1 in every 3 sexual assaults and rapes in London were committed by foreign nationals. So that's not just like a Muslim thing. It's just like a foreign national.
Right.
These are things that but we've imported that, haven't we? We have enough people in this country that need to be dealt with. Like, we have enough people in this country that commit crimes, that commit sexual assaults, all that. We've got our own problems. But then when you're importing it by the thousands every single year, it's absolute lunacy. So yeah, but I think, and I worry that we are going to end up in a situation where we have to have a serious conversation about how compatible people who have a more fundamentalist Islamic belief are with the West and with Europe and with Britain. So what we're seeing now is Islam becoming very involved in British politics. And that is a very, very dangerous thing as far as I'm concerned. In the wake of the October the 7th attacks, there was a party that wanted to be created called like the Islam Party, Islam for UK, so something like that anyway. And they rejected it because it was overtly religious grounds. But then what we've seen is splinter parties coming out, which are all just obsessed with Gaza. That's all they're obsessed with, Gaza, Gaza, Gaza. And what we're seeing now is independent candidates standing up around the country and winning elections in places like Birmingham, places like Manchester, local council elections in British towns, based purely on the issue that they stand for the people of Gaza. And what happens there is that there are huge numbers of the local Muslim population who feel compelled to vote for those people because there is a lot of community pressure, there is a lot of religious pressure there is a lot of cultural pressure there that you have to vote. If you don't vote for that person who is pro-Gaza, then you're a genocide enabler. Are you really a proper Muslim? All of this stuff. So we're seeing that now in Britain. And I don't think it will be that long before that group of people who so far are these independents dotted around the country unify and form a coherent force. And then it's going to be very difficult for Britain. Because if we see the population increase to, like I said to you, about 18% Muslim or something along those lines, and by the way, I don't envy aspects of the British Muslim population about this, because I think many of them will come under a huge amount of pressure in order to vote for whatever candidate is backed by the local imam or the community elders or the community leaders. And then before you know it, you have got the religion of Islam seriously impacting British politics.
Well, so we see, obviously, that's a huge problem. Everything you've laid out seems like a problem that would make the British public more sympathetic to the question I'm about to ask, and perhaps your and GB's audience it is. But I'm curious to know what the British public opinion, either from just regular people and even the government or the media figures, What is it when they look at what Donald Trump is doing to enact his immigration policy right now in the United States? Because even amongst his less popular policies, immigration seems to be one where he's consistently above water with the American public.
But on immigration, you better get your act together, or you're not going to have Europe anymore.
So what does the British public think about what's happening in America right now?
But you've got half the British public that President Trump could rescue 4 babies from a burning building and they'd still think he was evil, right? So you've got half those people that are just idiots, okay, orange man bad, whatever. You've got the other half that I think are more normal, who look at it and actually feel a deep sense of jealousy because he's doing things that we would like to do, like just blocking the border or turning people back or deporting people at a quick rate, sending them back to their countries. There's even this ridiculous situation that in Britain we had something called the Rwanda plan, which was that we were going to pay for Rwanda to build several different complexes over there, and we were going to send our illegal immigrants to Rwanda so they could be processed there. If they were approved, they would move to Rwanda and be part of Rwandan society. This current government blocked that. Now your president is using the accommodation we built to send people who've broken into America to Rwanda, which, I would, great, but I just think it's ridiculous. So,
yeah.
And he doesn't seem to have any problems deporting people. I've already outlined people we can't deport. This for me is the biggest issue facing the Western world. It's immigration, both legal and illegal, because everything comes from there. Issues with public services, issues with culture, issues with housing pressures, issues with the economy. Everything stems from that. And it looks to me like your president is sorting it out. And it looks very well, I know, what's happening over here is that our leaders are far, far too weak, and that they're willing to give in to people who, are a vocal minority of people who are these kind of like hardcore refugees welcome Antifa style people. There's 2 different questions there, really. The first one is how much the population really like Trump. Well, unfortunately, I don't really see that ever rising that much above 50%.
Makes sense.
The other half of that question is, well, how many people would actually support Trump-like policies?
Correct. That's a better question, probably.
But if it wasn't Trump doing it, then loads, right? Loads of people would all, loads, I reckon 85, 90% of people would support it. But the problem is our government listens to that 10 or 15%. And the reason why is because they are that 10 or 15%. And so they listen to them and they're too weak to act on it.
Well, I did want to touch on kind of the free speech issue, and we're just kind of running out of time because I know you have a hard out, but I do want to kind of end on this. You've mentioned it a few times. Britain and the United States share a really rich history. We fought in multiple wars together, and we have what people call the special relationship, right? Like the closest of close allies. But increasingly, I think in America, when we look over and we see things like arrests for social media posts or the forfeiting of a culture so willingly in a lot of ways, we wonder, is this a special relationship that interests us in the future if we continue to divulge? Should we look to a country like Japan or Korea that seemingly has more culturally in contact with us now than Britain does? Now, that might be a little out there, but that's kind of, some of the talk that's in the ether. So I've heard you mention that this is kind of the last chance for Britain. So how do you see this going? Does Britain, rise up? Does the lion rise, as you said, and kind of reclaim its rightful place I don't want to say rightful place, its earned place in the world and its rich cultural history? Or does it kind of just fade away into obscurity? What are we looking at here?
Look, we have one chance left to save Britain, as far as I'm concerned, and that chance will be at the next general election. I hope that your audience knows that there are the overwhelming majority of people in Britain look to America as our great ally, and we really do. And we feel let down by it's not us, all right? It's not us who are messing this up. It's not us who are screwing this up. It's some of the idiots that we've had running our country, and that has to change. So please do not lose faith in the British people. Don't lose faith in the British public. And I do think that British line is roaring because the situation has got so bad, and we are starting to see more and more people. And this is where I think outlets like GB News come in, because we are now having conversations on national television all day, every day, that no other outlet in Britain, like the BBC, would ever entertain. You wouldn't ever be allowed to have that. So now people feel more confident and more comfortable to voice their views because they agree with this stuff out in public. They're refusing to be silenced anymore. So everything that has happened can be undone. It'll be very difficult, but it can be undone. We can get control of our borders. We can start deporting people who shouldn't be here illegally, or criminals, etc. We can start deporting them, and we can reclaim things like free speech. We can do away with the Online Safety Act, which is a ridiculous bill that is basically stifling what can and cannot be said online. It's censoring content. We can do away with things like a ridiculous Islamophobia law. We can do away with things like the pub banter ban, which is going to mean that if any member of staff at a British pub, who's pulling pints, is offended by something that someone says to his mate after he's had 8 pints, that they can get them arrested and do all that. We can stop the police going after people for online posts. Like, all of this can be done, and it must be done. And I think it will be done after the next election. I think so. Do please keep the faith.
I want to keep this relationship. I think it's much better for the world if our two countries are strong together. So hopefully that we can figure something out. But Patrick, I really appreciate the perspective. I think it's something our audience is just going to really grip onto, because, we're seeing a lot of the same problems start to come up here. And like I said, the more aware people are, that's fantastic. And also, sorry to cut you early. I know you have to go, but we'd love to have you on the show sometime with Steven, if there's anything that's ever up in like the British zeitgeist, because we talk about censorship stuff a lot. I think GB News and us could be great partners in something like that. And likewise, if you ever need an American perspective on something, feel free to reach out to us too.
Oh, pretty well. Look, this is the special relationship in action. Can I just say it's been a real pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and please do invite me back. I know there's a lot of stuff that we haven't got around to talking about, and I would love the opportunity to do that. So anytime.
Absolutely, Pat. Thank you so much, and keep in touch. Good luck with everything.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. Bye-bye.